Mitch McConnell, the minority leader of the Senate, Republican, is choosing to step down today. He's announced it. So this does count as breaking news. What they're not talking about is the fact that he's going to stay in Senate. He's 82 years old. He says he's got plenty of gas in his tank. When you hear his speech, you'll hear it in a second. And he's going to stay in the Senate, even with his health issues that he's dealing with. I'll talk about my point of view on term limits at the end of this speech, but out of respect for the man, I'm just going to play the clip solid, and then I'll give you my opinion. So let's watch Mitch in his final speech, probably as minority leader, but he's staying senator. And I'll let you know my opinion of his policies too. So here we go.
Republican leader.
As some of you may know, this has been a particularly difficult time for my family. We tragically lost Elaine's younger sister, Angela, just a few weeks ago. When you lose a loved one, particularly at a young age, there's a certain introspection that accompanies the grieving process. Perhaps it is God's way of reminding you of your own life's journey, to reprioritize the impact of the world that we will all inevitably leave behind. I turned 82 last week. The end of my contributions are closer than I'd prefer. My career in the United States Senate began amidst the Reagan Revolution. The truth is, when I got here, I was just happy if anybody remembered my name. President Reagan called me Mitch O'Donnell. Close enough, I thought. My wife Elaine and I got married on President Reagan's birthday, February 6th. It's probably not the most romantic thing to admit, but Reagan meant a lot to both of us. For 31 years, Elaine has been the love of my life, and I'm eternally grateful to have her by my side. I think back to my first days in the Senate with deep appreciation for the time that helped shape my view of the world. I'm unconflicted about the good within our country and the irreplaceable role we play as the leader of the free world. It's why I worked so hard to get the national security package passed earlier this month. Believe me, I know the politics within my party at this particular moment in time. I have many faults. Misunderstanding politics is not one of them. That said, I believe more strongly than ever that America's global leadership is essential to preserving the shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan discussed. For as long as I'm drawing breath on this earth, I will defend American exceptionalism. So as I've been thinking about when I would deliver some news to the Senate, I always imagined a moment when I had total clarity and peace about the sunset of my work. A moment when I'm certain I have helped preserve the ideals I so strongly believe. That day arrived today. My goals when I was narrowly elected to the Senate back in 1984 were fairly modest. Do a good job for the people of Kentucky and convince them that by doing so they might rehire me for a second term. That was it. That was the plan. If you would have told me 40 years later that I would stand before you as the longest serving Senate leader in American history, frankly, I would have thought you'd lost your mind. I have the honor of representing Kentucky in the Senate longer than anyone else in our state's history. I just never could have imagined that happening when I arrived here in 1984 at 42. I'm filled with heartfelt gratitude and humility for the opportunity. But now it's 2024. I'm now 82. As Ecclesiastes tells us, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. To serve Kentucky in the Senate has been the honor of my life. To lead my Republican colleagues has been the highest privilege. But one of life's most underappreciated talents is to know when it's time to move on to life's next chapter. So I stand before you today, Mr. President, and my colleagues, to say this will be my last term as Republican leader of the Senate. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. However, I'll complete my job my colleagues have given me until we select a new leader in November and they take the helm next January. I'll finish the job the people of Kentucky hired me to do as well, albeit from a different seat, and I'm actually looking forward to that. So it's time for me to think about another season. I love the Senate. It's been my life. There may be more distinguished members of this body throughout our history, but I doubt there were any with any more admiration for the Senate. After all this time, I still get a thrill walking into the Capitol, and especially on this venerable floor, knowing that we, each of us, have the honor to represent our states and do the important work of our country. But Father Time remains undefeated. I'm no longer the young man sitting in the back, hoping colleagues would remember my name. It's time for the next generation of leadership. As Henry Clay said in this very body in 1850, the Constitution of the United States was not made merely for the generation that then existed, but for posterity, unlimited, undefined, endless, perpetual posterity. So time rolls on. There'll be a new custodian of this great institution next year. Won't surprise you to know I intend to turn this job over to a Republican majority leader. I have full confidence in my conference to choose my replacement and lead our country forward. There'll be other times to reminisce. I'm immensely proud of the accomplishments I've played some role in obtaining for the American people. Today is not the day to discuss all of that, because as I said earlier, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. There are many challenges we must meet to deliver for the American people, and each will have my full effort and attention. I still have enough gas in my tank to thoroughly disappoint my critics, and I intend to do so with all the enthusiasm with which they become accustomed. So to my colleagues, thank you for entrusting me with our success. It's been an honor to work with each of you. There'll be plenty of time to express my gratitude in greater detail as I sprint towards the finish line, which is now in sight. I yield the floor.
Mitch McConnell, American politician, of course, and retired attorney who's been serving as Senate Minority Leader since 2021 and the Senate United States Senator since 1985. Okay, 1985. I graduated high school in 82, so I was 21 years old. I'm 59 now. He started serving and has not left the Senate, okay? Just had to say that, okay? That's how long he's been in there. McConnell first served as Deputy United States Assistant Attorney General under President Gerald Ford in 1974, people. Most of you, well, a lot of you have probably been alive since 1974. Senator Ted Cruz made a statement, and it's actually an important one because this kind of gives you a definition of a rhino, Republican in name only. Sorry, Mitch, but we've got to call it out. But he spoke with his frustration of the chairman on his ill-fated bipartisan border security and foreign aid bill, once again calling for the minority leader, Mitch McConnell, to be ousted. The junior senator from Texas declared it's time for McConnell to go in a recent news conference with 6 of his conservative Senate colleagues. I think a Republican leader should actually lead this conference and should advance the priorities of Republicans, Cruz said. He also criticized the policy and policies behind the border bill that McConnell, a Kentucky Republican, backed on his podcast, The Verdict, Wednesday. Cruz was opposed to the bill well before most of his Republican counterparts. The bill's got loopholes. I read part of it, and it was not going to stop the border crisis. So for him to cave on that was very disappointing, and not being strong on the border, which is an absolute crisis right now. So what do you think? Do you think that Mitch McConnell will, obviously, term limits, they need to come in. I mean, I was 21 years old, I believe, if the math is correct, when he started office. I'm 59 years old now, okay? He's having lapses of judgment and freezing up on camera, not normal for him. He's not planning on leaving the Senate. He says he's got a lot of gas in his tank, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And, you know, I see and I understand the dedication. I believe there's some people that are dedicated to stay in the Senate because they believe that they're serving the American people. And then there's people like Nancy Pelosi, which, you know, she's profited like $900 million. She's as corrupt comes. And you can see her motivation to stay in the Senate because it's, you know, she's kind of old. She's old enough to start retiring. But this is about Mitch. What do you think? Do you think that he should step down completely? That's my opinion. So let me know what you think. This is William Wieting reporting on Mitch McConnell stepping down as the minority leader in the Republican Senate. Actually, it's a Democratic-controlled Senate, but he's a minority leader, obviously. So, again, William Wieting reporting from MustangMedic. Appreciate you. Let's find the truth. It's going to happen. It might take a little more time than we want, but it's going to happen. Thank you.